The gunshot cracked through the air like thunder on a clear day, and Zara Morrison didn't even flinch as the bullet splintered the wooden post just inches from her head. Fort Lyon, Colorado had made its opinion of her perfectly clear, and that opinion was as cold as the barrel of Sheriff Caldwell's revolver, which was now pointed directly at her chest. "I'm giving you until sundown to leave this town, Miss Morrison," Sheriff Caldwell growled, his weathered face twisted in disgust. "Fort Lyon has no place for women like you." Zara lifted her chin, the dust of the journey still clinging to her threadbare dress. At 24, she'd seen enough of the world to know when she wasn't wanted, but she'd also endured enough hardship to know when to stand her ground. "I have papers proving I inherited this land from my uncle," she said firmly, patting the satchel at her side. "And I intend to claim what's rightfully mine." The sheriff spat in the dirt. "Your uncle was a drunk and a thief. That land belongs to the railroad now. You're wasting your time and mine." The small crowd that had gathered around them murmured in agreement. Zara scanned their faces hardened by frontier life and prejudice. Not a single sympathetic glance among them. The year was 1878, and Fort Lyon had flourished as a critical trading post along the Santa Fe Trail, but progress hadn't softened its harsh edges or its even harsher judgment of outsiders. "I'll see the judge," Zara insisted, ignoring the sinking feeling in her stomach. She had exactly $2.16 to her name. She'd spent everything else on the journey west after her parents' deaths left her alone in Philadelphia with nothing but debts and her uncle's letter about a small plot of land in Colorado. "Judge won't be back for 3 weeks," the sheriff said with a cruel smile. "And no one in this town will give you board or bread in the meantime. Now get." As the sheriff walked away, the crowd began to disperse, some shaking their heads while others whispered loudly enough for her to hear. "Lost cause, that one. Probably a harlot from back east. Won't last a day out here." Zara clutched her satchel tighter and fought back tears. She would not cry in front of these people. She wouldn't give them the satisfaction. "You look like you could use a drink," came a deep voice from behind her. Zara turned to find herself staring into the bluest eyes she'd ever seen. They belonged to a tall man leaning against a post, his hat tipped low, but not low enough to hide those eyes or the hint of a smile beneath his neatly trimmed beard. Unlike the others, he wasn't looking at her with contempt, just curiosity. "I don't drink," she replied automatically. The man chuckled. "I was thinking water, madam. You look about ready to fall over, and Colorado sun don't care much for eastern complexions." Zara hesitated. Her throat was painfully dry, and her head had started to pound from the altitude and heat. "I'm Wade Zimmerman," he said, offering a canteen. "I run cattle about 10 miles north of here." Zara accepted the canteen, her fingers brushing against his calloused hand. "Zara Morrison." "I know," he replied with a slight nod. "News travels fast around here, especially when it involves Jasper Morrison's niece showing up to claim land that half the town's been trying to get their hands on since he died." She took a long drink of water before asking, "Did you know my uncle?" "Enough to know he wasn't quite the devil they make him out to be." Wade glanced around the nearly empty street. "And enough to know that you're not going to get a fair hearing in this town without some help." "Why would you help me?" Zara asked, suspicion creeping into her voice. "You don't know me." Wade Zimmerman adjusted his hat, those blue eyes suddenly serious. "Let's just say I'm not fond of seeing the powerful take advantage of those who can't defend themselves. And in this town, there's no one more powerful than the railroad men and their cronies." "Sheriff Caldwell, among others," Wade confirmed. "Look, my wagon's over there. I can take you to my ranch for the night. You can clean up, get some food in you, and we can figure out your next move." Or you can stand here until sundown when Caldwell comes back with more than just words to drive you out. Zara knew accepting help from a stranger, especially a male stranger, was risky, but the alternative seemed far worse. She'd come too far to turn back now. "I can pay you," she said, reaching for her meager savings. Wade held up a hand. "Keep your money. You're going to need it." As they walked toward his wagon, Zara felt the stares of the townspeople following them. One woman outside the general store crossed herself, while a man in front of the saloon spat in their direction. "They seem to hold you in high regard as well," Zara observed dryly. Wade's laugh was unexpectedly warm. "Let's just say Fort Lyon and I have an understanding. They leave me be, and I return the favor most of the time." He helped her onto the wagon bench. "Besides, I've never much cared for popularity contests." As the wagon pulled away from Fort Lyon, Zara looked back at the dusty street and the hostile faces. She'd hoped to find a home here, or at least a fresh start. Instead, she'd found enemies she didn't even know she had. "Your uncle's land," Wade said as he steered the horses onto the main trail. "It's good land. Water rights, timber, and it sits right where the railroad men want to expand their depot." "Is that why they want it so badly?" "That, and there's rumors Jasper found gold on that property before he died." Wade shook his head. "I don't put much stock in those tales myself, but it doesn't matter. The railroad doesn't like loose ends or competition." Zara clutched her satchel, feeling the weight of her uncle's deed inside it. "My uncle wrote to me that the land would provide for me if anything happened to him. He died just 3 weeks after sending that letter." "Convenient timing for some," Wade remarked. "Did the letter say anything else? Just that I should trust no one in Fort Lyon except—" Zara frowned, trying to recall the exact wording. "Except the man who saved his life during the blizzard of '73. Wade's hands tightened on the reins, but his expression remained neutral. "Your uncle was a complicated man, Miss Morrison, but he didn't deserve what happened to him." "And what was that exactly?" "The sheriff wouldn't say. Official story is he got drunk and fell into the river." Wade's voice was flat. "Unofficial story is he had help falling." The road grew rougher as they left the main trail, winding through hills covered with pine and aspen. After nearly an hour of travel, they crested a hill, and Zara gasped at the view. Below them stretched a lush valley, green pastures dotted with cattle, and in the distance, a sturdy 2-story ranch house with smoke curling from the chimney. "Welcome to Silver Creek Ranch," Wade said, a note of pride in his voice. "It's beautiful," Zara breathed. After weeks of travel through dusty towns and barren landscapes, the valley seemed like an oasis. As they approached the ranch, a young boy of about 16 ran out to meet them. "Mr. Zimmerman, didn't expect you back so soon." His eyes widened when he spotted Zara. Hello, madam." "Tommy, this is Miss Morrison. She'll be our guest for a while. Can you see to the horses while I show her inside?" "Yes, sir." The boy scrambled to take the reins, sneaking curious glances at Zara. Wade helped Zara down from the wagon. Up close, the ranch house was even more impressive, sturdy logs and stone, with glass windows and a wide porch. It spoke of permanence and care, nothing like the hastily constructed buildings in town. "It's not what you'd call fancy," Wade said, misreading her admiration for disappointment. "But it's solid." "It's more than solid," Zara corrected him. "It's a home." Something in Wade's expression softened at her words. He led her inside, where the scent of cooking food made Zara's stomach growl embarrassingly loud. A middle-aged woman with silver-streaked hair looked up from the stove. "Wade Zimmerman, you didn't tell me we were having company," she scolded, but her eyes were kind as they took in Zara's travel-worn appearance. "Mrs. Abernathy, this is Miss Zara Morrison. She'll be staying with us for a bit." Wade hung his hat on a peg by the door. "Miss Morrison, this is Mrs. Abernathy, who keeps this place and me from falling into complete disorder." "Jasper Morrison's niece?" Mrs. Abernathy asked, wiping her hands on her apron. "Lord have mercy, child, you look half-starved." "Sit down before you fall down." Before Zara could protest, she found herself seated at a large oak table with a bowl of stew in front of her and a chunk of fresh bread beside it. The food was simple but delicious, and she had to force herself to eat slowly. "Mrs. Abernathy, could you prepare the guest room for Miss Morrison?" Wade asked after allowing Zara to eat in peace for several minutes. "Already on it," the older woman replied. "And I'll draw her a bath too. No offense meant, dear, but you look like you've been traveling hard." "None taken," Zara said with genuine gratitude. "A bath sounds heavenly." After Mrs. Abernathy left the room, Wade sat across from Zara, his expression serious. "There's something you should know about your uncle's land." Zara set down her spoon. "What is it?" "The deed you have it might not be enough. The railroad has been filing claims on properties all through this territory, sometimes with forged documents, sometimes with bribes to officials." "But that's illegal." Wade's laugh was without humor. "Out here, the law tends to favor those with the most guns and the most money. And right now, that's the railroad." "So you think I should give up?" Zara asked, disappointment and anger rising within her. "No." Wade leaned forward, his blue eyes intense. "I think you need to know what you're up against. This won't be settled with just a piece of paper and good intentions." "Then how will it be settled?" Wade was quiet for a moment. "Your uncle didn't just leave you land, Miss Morrison. He left you a fight. Are you prepared for that?" Zara thought of everything she'd left behind, of the long journey west, of the hostility in Fort Lyon, and of her promise to her parents that she would make something of herself. "I've been fighting my whole life, Mr. Zimmerman. This is just one more battle." Something that might have been respect flickered in Wade's eyes. "Good. Because I think your uncle left something else too, something the railroad men want badly enough to kill for." "The gold," Wade shook his head. "Something more valuable in these parts, proof. Proof of how they've been stealing land and manipulating records. Jasper was a drunk, but he was also a former clerk for the county records office. He knew too much. And you think he hid this proof on his land? I think that's what he was trying to tell you in that letter." Wade ran a hand through his hair. "The man who saved him in the blizzard of '73. Zara's eyes widened as understanding dawned. "That was you." Wade nodded once. "We got caught in a freak storm while checking fence lines. Took shelter in a cave for 3 days. Man talks a lot when he thinks he might freeze to death." "So you know what he was hiding?" "Not exactly. But I know where to start looking." Wade stood up. "Rest tonight. Tomorrow we'll ride out to your uncle's property before anyone in town realizes you didn't just move on." That night, after a hot bath that washed away weeks of trail dust, Zara lay in a real bed for the first time since leaving Philadelphia. The room was simple but comfortable, with handmade quilts and curtains that Mrs. Abernathy had clearly sewn herself. Through the window, she could see stars brighter and more numerous than she'd ever imagined possible. Despite her exhaustion, sleep eluded her. Her mind kept returning to Wade Zimmerman, the mysterious rancher who'd stepped in to help her when everyone else had turned their backs. Why would he risk making enemies of the most powerful men in the region for a stranger? What wasn't he telling her? And more troubling still, how could she fight for her uncle's land against men who wouldn't hesitate to use violence to get what they wanted? Morning came too quickly, announced by a rooster's crow and the smell of coffee and bacon. Zara, dressed in her cleanest remaining outfit, a simple navy skirt and white blouse that had seen better days. In the kitchen, she found Wade already at the table, studying a map spread out before him. He looked up when she entered, and something in his gaze made her suddenly self-conscious. "Mrs. Abernathy left some clothes for you," he said, nodding toward a bundle on a chair. "Said they might fit better than what you brought for riding." Zara examined the bundle: a split riding skirt, sturdier blouse, and leather boots. "These are very fine. I can't accept. They belong to my sister," Wade interrupted. "She moved to Denver last year after she got married, left a trunk of things she said I could give away." "Oh." Zara ran her fingers over the quality fabric. "Please thank her for me when you write to her." A shadow crossed Wade's face. "I will. Now you should eat. We have a long ride ahead." An hour later, Zara was seated atop a gentle chestnut mare, wearing her borrowed riding clothes and feeling more capable than she had in weeks. Wade rode beside her on a powerful black stallion, while Tommy followed on a dun pony, leading a pack horses with supplies. "Your uncle's property is about 2 hours' ride," Wade explained as they set out. "We'll approach from the north, through the forest, to avoid being seen from the main road." The journey took them through landscapes more varied and beautiful than Zara had imagined possible: pine forests that smelled of sap and earth, meadows bursting with wildflowers, and finally a rocky ridge that offered a view of a small valley below. Wade reined in his horse and pointed. "There it is, Jasper's claim." Zara's heart sank as she took in the ramshackle cabin with its partially collapsed roof, the overgrown fields, and the dilapidated barn. This was her inheritance. This was what the railroad wanted so badly. "It looks abandoned," she said, unable to keep the disappointment from her voice. "Appearances can be deceiving," Wade replied. "That valley has the best water source for miles. The creek never runs dry, even in drought years. And see those rock formations to the east, perfect natural corral for livestock." "But there's so much work to be done," Zara murmured. Wade glanced at her, his expression unreadable. "Did you expect a palace, Miss Morrison?" "No, but I expected something more than ruins." "Everything worth having takes work," Wade said simply. "The question is whether you're willing to put in that work." Before Zara could answer, Tommy called out in alarm. "Riders coming, Mr. Zimmerman. From the south road." Wade pulled out a spyglass and looked in the direction Tommy pointed. His jaw tightened. "Sheriff Caldwell and 3 of his men. And they're not riding like they're on a friendly visit." "How did they know we'd be here?" Zara asked, her heart racing. "Someone in town must have seen us leave yesterday and guessed our destination." Wade closed the spyglass with a snap. "Tommy, take Miss Morrison into the trees." "I'll deal with the sheriff." "No," Zara said firmly. "This is my land. I won't hide." Wade's eyes met hers, and after a moment he nodded. "Stay behind me then." They rode down into the valley, stopping in front of the cabin just as Sheriff Caldwell and his men arrived. The sheriff's face darkened when he saw Zara. "Thought I told you to get out of the county, Miss Morrison," he said, his hand resting casually on his holstered gun. "This is my property, Sheriff," Zara replied, grateful that her voice remained steady. "I have every right to be here." "Actually, you don't." Caldwell pulled a document from his vest pocket. "This land was legally purchased by the Western Pacific Railroad 3 months ago, after your uncle's taxes went unpaid." Wade moved his horse slightly forward. "That's interesting, Sheriff, considering I paid those taxes myself as a favor to Jasper. I have the receipt back at my ranch." The sheriff's eyes narrowed. "You're interfering in matters that don't concern you, Zimmerman." "A woman being bullied off her rightful property concerns me plenty," Wade replied, his voice deceptively casual despite the tension Zara could see in his shoulders. One of the sheriff's men, a burly fellow with a scar across his cheek, spat into the dirt. "We don't need to listen to this. Let's just burn the cabin and be done with it." "You'll do no such thing," Zara said, urging her horse forward despite Wade's warning glance. "I have legal documentation proving this land belongs to me, and I intend to present it to the circuit judge when he arrives." "Judge Wilson is a reasonable man," Caldwell said with a smirk. "He understands progress. The railroad coming through is the best thing that could happen to this county." "Is that why you helped Jasper Morrison into an early grave?" Wade asked quietly. "For progress?" A deadly silence fell over the group. The sheriff's face flushed with anger. "You'd best watch your accusations, Zimmerman. Even a man with your reputation can push too far." "It's not an accusation," Wade replied evenly. "It's a question. One that Judge Wilson might be interested in as well, especially when he sees what Jasper left behind." Uncertainty flickered across Caldwell's face. "What are you talking about?" "Jasper was a drunk, but he wasn't stupid," Wade said. "He kept records, detailed ones, about land deals, bribes, and a certain sheriff who's been on the railroad's payroll for years." "You're bluffing," Caldwell snarled, but Zara could see the doubt in his eyes. Wade simply smiled. "Am I? Are you willing to bet your freedom on that?" "Because those records are going to a federal marshal if anything happens to Miss Morrison or her property." The tense standoff seemed to stretch for hours, though it was probably only minutes. Finally, the sheriff jerked his head at his men. "We're leaving." "But this isn't over, Zimmerman." "Not by a long shot." As they rode away, Zara let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "Thank you," she said quietly to Wade. "But was that true about the records?" Wade's expression was grim. "Partly. Jasper did keep records. But I don't know exactly what's in them or where they're hidden. That's what we need to find out." They spent the remainder of the day searching the cabin and the surrounding property, but found nothing resembling important documents. By sunset, Zara was exhausted and discouraged. "We should head back to the ranch," Wade said, watching the sky darken. "It's not safe to stay here overnight, not with Caldwell knowing where we are." "But we haven't found anything," Zara protested. "We've only just started looking," Wade reminded her. "This place has a lot of hiding spots." "We'll come back tomorrow with more supplies and continue the search." As they prepared to leave, Zara took one last look at the run-down cabin. Despite its condition, she felt a strange connection to it, as if her uncle's presence lingered among the rough-hewn logs and sagging porch. "Mr. Zimmerman," she said suddenly, "did my uncle ever mention a special place here? Somewhere that meant something to him?" Wade paused, considering. "He talked about the creek a lot, said it reminded him of a place back east where he grew up. Can you show me?" Wade led her down a narrow path behind the cabin to where a clear creek bubbled over smooth stones. The water caught the last rays of sunlight, turning it to liquid gold. "He used to sit here for hours," Wade said quietly. "Said it helped him think." Zara knelt beside the water, trying to see what her uncle had seen. The creek widened at this point, creating a small pool before continuing its journey downhill. Near the edge of the pool stood a large boulder, partially hollowed at its base by years of water flow. Something about the boulder caught Zara's attention. It seemed oddly positioned, not quite natural. She moved closer, examining the ground around it. "Mr. Zimmerman," she called, excitement building in her voice. "I think the soil here has been disturbed recently." Wade was at her side in an instant, his hands already working to dig around the boulder's base. After several minutes of effort, his fingers caught on something solid. He pulled, and a small metal box emerged from the damp earth. "Well, I'll be damned," he breathed. "Your uncle was cleverer than I gave him credit for." The box was locked, but the key hanging on a leather cord around Zara's neck, sent to her along with her uncle's letter, fit perfectly. Inside, they found a stack of documents, some official-looking with seals and stamps, others in her uncle's cramped handwriting. "These are land deeds," Wade said, scanning the papers. "And these are records of payments bribes to county officials, including Sheriff Caldwell." He let out a low whistle. "Your uncle documented everything. Names, dates, amounts. This is more than enough to bring down the entire operation." "And is this enough to secure my claim to the land?" Zara asked, hope rising within her. Wade nodded slowly. "With these documents and your uncle's deed, even a corrupt judge would have a hard time ruling against you, especially if we get these to the federal marshal first." As they secured the box and mounted their horses for the ride back to the ranch, Zara felt a strange mix of triumph and sorrow. She had what she needed to claim her inheritance, but at what cost to her uncle? "He was trying to make things right," Wade said softly, as if reading her thoughts. "That's why they killed him. He was going to expose them all. And now I'll finish what he started," Zara said with determination. Wade studied her face in the fading light, his expression thoughtful. "You remind me of him, not the drinking or the temper," he added with a small smile, "but the stubbornness, the refusal to back down." "Is that a compliment, Mr. Zimmerman?" "It is." His smile deepened. "Though I suspect it might also be a warning of the trouble to come." They rode back to Silver Creek Ranch in comfortable silence, the metal box secure in Wade's saddlebag. The stars emerged one by one, filling the vast Colorado sky with pinpricks of silver light. For the first time since arriving in this harsh territory, Zara felt something akin to hope. She had her uncle's land, evidence against his killers, and an unexpected ally in Wade Zimmerman. What she didn't yet realize was that the fight was only beginning, and that it would test not only her determination, but also her heart in ways she never could have imagined. The next week passed in a blur of activity. With the evidence from Jasper's metal box, Wade rode to Denver to speak with a federal marshal he knew and trusted. Zara remained at Silver Creek Ranch, both for her safety and to avoid drawing attention from Sheriff Caldwell and his men. During Wade's absence, she threw herself into learning everything she could about ranching and the Colorado Territory. Mrs. Abernathy taught her to cook over a wood stove and preserve food for the coming winter. Tommy showed her how to ride properly, laughing good-naturedly when she fell, but always offering a hand to help her up. And each night, she studied the maps and documents Wade had left behind, planning improvements for her uncle's property. When Wade returned 5 days later, his expression was grim but satisfied. "The marshal is sending men," he announced as they gathered around the kitchen table. "They'll be here within 2 weeks. In the meantime, we need to be careful. Word is spreading that the railroad's operations are under investigation, and desperate men do desperate things." "What about my uncle's land?" Zara asked. "The marshal filed your claim with the Territorial Land Office. It's official now, the property is yours." Wade's serious expression softened. "Congratulations, Miss Morrison. You're officially a Colorado landowner." That evening, Mrs. Abernathy insisted on preparing a special dinner to celebrate. The table was laden with venison, fresh bread, preserved peaches, and even a cake made with precious sugar saved for special occasions. Tommy had picked wildflowers which now sat in a jar at the center of the table, adding color to the festive scene. As they ate, Zara found herself watching Wade. In the week since their meeting, she'd learned much about the quiet rancher. His parents had been among the first settlers in the area, establishing Silver Creek Ranch when he was just a boy. He'd fought briefly in the Civil War, returning home to find his father dead and the ranch in disrepair. Through sheer determination, he'd rebuilt it into one of the most successful operations in the county. What intrigued her most, however, was the respect he showed to everyone from Mrs. Abernathy and Tommy to the ranch hands who worked his land. In a territory where might often made right, Wade Zimmerman led by example rather than force. "You're staring, Miss Morrison," Wade said quietly, his blue eyes twinkling with amusement. Zara felt heat rise to her cheeks. "I was just thinking about how much has changed in such a short time. A week ago I was alone in a hostile town with no prospects and no allies. And now I have land, a purpose, and—" She hesitated. "Friends, I hope." Wade's gaze held hers for a moment longer than necessary. "Yes, you do, after dinner while Mrs. Abernathy and Tommy cleared the table. Wade invited Zara to join him on the porch. The evening was cool but pleasant, with a gentle breeze carrying the scent of pine and sage. "I've been thinking about your uncle's property," Wade said as they settled into chairs. "It needs a lot of work before winter comes. The cabin roof, the barn, fences." "I know," Zara sighed, "and I have very little money to hire help." "I wasn't suggesting you hire help," Wade said. "My men and I can assist with the repairs. Consider it a welcome gift." Zara stared at him in surprise. "That's incredibly generous, Mr. Zimmerman, but I couldn't possibly accept—" "Your uncle was my friend," Wade interrupted gently. "And neighbors help each other out here. It's how we survive." "Neighbors," Zara repeated. Wade smiled. "Our properties share a border to the east. Didn't you notice on the maps?" She hadn't, but the knowledge that Wade's ranch adjoined her uncle's land filled her with a strange comfort. "Still, I insist on repaying you somehow. If you're determined to repay the debt, you can help Mrs. Abernathy with the harvest festival next month. She's been complaining that she needs more hands to prepare food for the whole county." Zara laughed. "I'd be happy to help, though I should warn you my cooking skills are still somewhat rudimentary. Mrs. Abernathy is a patient teacher." Wade's voice grew serious again. "There's something else we need to discuss. The marshal advised that you should stay away from Fort Lyon until his men arrive. Sheriff Caldwell knows we have evidence against him now, which makes him dangerous. But I need supplies for the cabin, and I'll send Tommy to the next town over for whatever you need." Wade leaned forward, his expression intent. "Promise me you won't go into Fort Lyon alone, Zara." It was the first time he'd used her given name, and something about the way he said it sent a shiver through her that had nothing to do with the evening chill. "I promise," she said softly. The next morning, Wade and 3 of his ranch hands accompanied Zara to her property. Seeing it in full daylight, without the urgency of their previous visit, she could better appreciate what Wade had tried to tell her. Yes, the cabin was dilapidated and the fields overgrown, but the setting was beautiful, a sheltered valley with rich soil, abundant water, and timber for building and fuel. "Your uncle chose well," Wade said as they surveyed the property from horseback. "This land will be good to you if you're good to it." The men set to work immediately, first securing the cabin roof to protect against the afternoon thunderstorms common in Colorado summers. Zara worked alongside them, learning to handle tools and ignoring the occasional surprised glances from the ranch hands when she insisted on carrying her share of the lumber. By midday, they'd made significant progress. While the men continued working, Zara explored the property more thoroughly. The creek where they'd found the metal box bubbled cheerfully in the sunshine. Following it downstream, she discovered a small apple orchard, the trees bent with age but still bearing fruit. "Those trees are nearly 30 years old," Wade said, coming up behind her. "Your uncle's father planted them when he first came to the territory." "My grandfather was here?" Zara asked in surprise. Wade nodded. "This land has been in your family longer than most folks have been in Colorado. That's another reason the railroad men couldn't just take it outright. Too many old-timers remember when the Morrisons first settled here." Zara plucked an apple from a low-hanging branch. It was small but perfect, with red and gold skin. I had no idea my family had such history here. My father never spoke of it. From what Jasper told me, your father and he had a falling out years ago. Something about your father choosing city life over ranching. That sounds like my father, Zara said with a sad smile. He was determined to be a gentleman. He worked so hard to establish himself in Philadelphia society, only to lose everything in the panic of '73. Wade was quiet for a moment. And now you're back where your family began. Yes, Zara mused, looking around at the land that was now hers. I suppose I am. They worked on the property every day for the next week, making steady progress. The cabin roof was repaired, the chimney cleared, windows reglazed, and the worst of the overgrowth cut back from around the buildings. Zara insisted on learning every aspect of the repairs, from mixing mortar to replacing rotted floorboards. You're a quick study, Wade commented as he watched her successfully nail down a section of porch decking. Most city folks take a lot longer to adapt to this kind of work. I've always been good with my hands, Zara replied, wiping sweat from her brow. My mother thought it unladylike, but my father encouraged it. He said practical skills would serve me better than playing the pianoforte or embroidering pillowcases. Your father sounds like a wise man. He was, Zara said softly, just not very lucky. As they worked side by side day after day, Zara found herself increasingly drawn to Wade. It wasn't just his kindness or his willingness to help. It was the quiet strength he radiated, the respect he showed her intelligence and determination, and the way his rare smiles transformed his serious face into something that made her heart beat faster. One evening, as they sat on the newly repaired porch of her cabin, watching the sunset paint the valley in shades of gold and pink, Wade asked about her life before coming to Colorado. It must have been quite different, he said. Philadelphia society and all. Zara laughed without humor. I wasn't exactly part of society. My father was a merchant who aspired to higher circles, but we were always on the periphery. Not quite good enough for the old families, but trying desperately to belong. And you, did you want to belong? She considered the question. I wanted my parents to be happy, but I never felt comfortable at those society gatherings. Too many rules, too much pretense. She gestured to the wild beauty surrounding them. This feels more honest somehow. Wade nodded, understanding in his eyes. That's why I could never leave, even when times got hard. The land doesn't care about your name or your clothes or your accent. It only cares about how you treat it. Is that why the town doesn't like you? Zara asked boldly. Because you don't care about their rules. A smile tugged at the corner of Wade's mouth. Partly. I also refused to sell my water rights to the railroad, testified against a corrupt judge who was taking bribes, and once punched the mayor's son for mistreating a horse. Zara laughed. No wonder Sheriff Caldwell looked so unhappy to see you with me. Caldwell and I have history, Wade admitted. He tried to force me off my land 5 years ago, claimed I hadn't paid taxes. I had to ride all the way to Denver to prove him wrong. He glanced at her. Fort Lyon doesn't take kindly to people who don't bend to its will. Then I suppose I'm in good company, Zara said. Wade's gaze held hers, something unspoken passing between them. Yes, he said quietly. I suppose you are. The next day brought clouds and the threat of rain. As they worked to reinforce the barn doors before the storm hit, a rider appeared on the horizon, approaching at a gallop. Wade immediately moved to stand between Zara and the approaching horse, his hand going to the revolver at his hip. But as the rider drew closer, he relaxed. It's Tommy, he said, but the tension didn't leave his voice. The boy wouldn't be riding so hard unless something was wrong. Tommy reined in his lathered horse, his young face flushed with exertion and worry. "Mr. Zimmerman, Sheriff Caldwell and a bunch of men are heading this way, Mrs. Abernathy sent me to warn you." "How many men?" Wade asked sharply. "At least 10, maybe more. And they're armed, sir, not just pistols, rifles, and shotguns too." Wade turned to Zara, his expression grim. "They're not coming to talk this time. They're coming to finish what they started with your uncle." Fear clutched at Zara's heart, but she forced it down. "What do we do?" Wade glanced at the 3 ranch hands who had stopped working and were now looking to him for direction. "Pete, take Miss Morrison and Tommy back to Silver Creek through the North Pass. John and Marcus, you ride to the Henderson place. They've got 6 able-bodied men who'll help. I'll stay here and try to slow Caldwell down." "No," Zara said firmly. "I won't leave my property. And I certainly won't leave you to face them alone." "This isn't the time for stubbornness, Zara," Wade said, his voice sharp with concern. "These men are coming to kill us and burn this place to the ground. You need to go." "And what about you?" she demanded. "You expect me to ride away while you face 10 armed men by yourself?" Wade's jaw tightened. "I know this land better than they do. I can hold them off until help arrives." "Or you could die," Zara said bluntly. "And I won't have that on my conscience." A tense silence fell between them, broken only by the distant rumble of thunder. Finally, Wade turned to the others. "Pete, John, ride for help. Tommy, take our fastest horse and go to the marshal's office in Denver. Tell them what's happening." He looked back at Zara. "If you won't leave, we need to prepare for a fight." The next hour was a blur of activity as they barricaded the cabin and positioned themselves for defense. Wade brought in extra ammunition from his saddlebags and showed Zara how to load and fire a shotgun. "Aim for the center of the body," he instructed, his hand steady on hers as he demonstrated the proper stance. "And don't hesitate. These men won't." Zara swallowed hard but nodded. The weight of the shotgun was unfamiliar in her hands, but she was determined to defend her home and the man who had risked everything to help her. As the first fat raindrops began to fall, Wade positioned himself at a window, his rifle ready. "They'll come from the main trail," he said. "The rain might slow them down, but not for long." "Why are they doing this?" Zara asked, taking her position at another window. "Even if they want the land, surely murder is too great a risk." Wade's expression was grim. "It's not just about the land anymore. Those documents we found implicate Caldwell and several prominent men in Fort Lyon in crimes that could send them to prison. They can't let that evidence reach the marshal." "But the marshal already knows. He knows what I told him, but without the actual documents, it's just my word against theirs. And in this territory, that's not enough." The rain intensified, becoming a steady downpour that limited visibility to just a few yards beyond the cabin. Lightning flashed, followed almost immediately by a crack of thunder that shook the newly repaired windows. "At least the storm will make it harder for them to burn us out," Wade commented, his eyes never leaving the trail. The minutes stretched into an hour, then 2. The storm raged around them, but there was no sign of Caldwell and his men. Zara's arms ached from holding the shotgun, but she didn't lower it. "Could Tommy have been mistaken?" she finally asked. Wade shook his head. "He wouldn't have ridden like that unless he was certain." He frowned, considering. They might be waiting out the storm. Or what? Or they're approaching from another direction. Wade moved to a different window, scanning the rain-soaked landscape. The creek crossing, maybe. It's longer but less exposed. As if in answer to his speculation, a flash of lightning illuminated several dark figures moving through the trees near the creek. Wade immediately dropped to a crouch, pulling Zara down with him. "They're here," he whispered. "At least 6 of them that I could see. Stay low and don't fire unless I tell you to." We need to make every shot count." Zara's heart hammered in her chest, but she nodded, gripping the shotgun tighter. They crawled to positions on either side of the door where they could see the approaching men without being easily spotted. The first shot came without warning, shattering a window and embedding itself in the wall above Zara's head. She flinched but held her position. "Morrison's niece," Sheriff Caldwell's voice carried through the rain. "We know you're in there. Come out now and you won't be harmed." Wade caught Zara's eye and shook his head, warning her to remain silent. "You've got 1 minute," Caldwell continued when no response came. "After that, we burn the cabin with you in it." "That's not going to happen, Caldwell," Wade called back. "The marshal knows everything." "Killing us won't change that." A burst of gunfire answered him, bullets splintering wood and breaking the remaining windows. Wade returned fire, his shots measured and precise. A cry of pain told Zara he'd hit at least one of Caldwell's men. The exchange of gunfire continued for several minutes, neither side gaining an advantage. Then Zara smelled smoke. "They're trying to set fire to the porch," she warned Wade. Despite the heavy rain, the smoke grew thicker. They could hear men approaching, using the smoke as cover. "We need to move," Wade said urgently. "The back door will make a run for the creek." "But my land buildings can be rebuilt," Wade cut her off. "Lives can't. Come on." They crawled to the back of the cabin where a small door led to a path down to the creek. Wade checked outside quickly, then motioned for Zara to follow. They slipped out into the rain, the sound of the storm masking their escape. They had almost reached the cover of the trees when a shout went up behind them. Gunfire erupted and Wade stumbled, clutching his arm. "Wade!" Zara cried, grabbing him to keep him upright. "Keep moving," he gritted out, blood seeping between his fingers where he gripped his upper arm. They splashed across the creek, the cold water numbing Zara's feet through her boots. On the other side, Wade led her to a cluster of boulders, the same area where they'd found her uncle's hidden documents. "There's a cave," Wade gasped, pushing aside branches to reveal a narrow opening in the rock face. "Jasper and I used it as a shelter during that blizzard." They squeezed inside just as another volley of shots ricocheted off the rocks outside. The cave was small but dry, extending back into darkness. Wade collapsed against the wall, his breathing labored. "Let me see," Zara insisted, gently moving his hand away from the wound. The bullet had torn through the flesh of his upper arm, but hadn't hit bone. Still, he was losing blood rapidly. She tore strips from her petticoat to bind the wound, working quickly by the dim light filtering through the cave entrance. "You're good at that," Wade observed through clenched teeth. "I volunteered at a hospital during the war," Zara explained, tying off the makeshift bandage. "I was young, but they needed all the help they could get." Outside, they could hear Caldwell's men searching, their voices carrying through the rain. They seemed uncertain where their quarry had disappeared to, but it was only a matter of time before they found the cave. "We need to go deeper," Wade said, struggling to his feet. "There's another way out. It comes up near the old hunting cabin on my property." Zara supported him as they moved further into the cave, feeling their way along the rough stone walls. The darkness was absolute now, the sounds of pursuit growing fainter behind them. "How did you and my uncle find this place?" Zara asked, partly to distract Wade from his pain and partly to mask her own fear of the enveloping blackness. "Pure luck," Wade replied, his voice tight. "We were half frozen, couldn't see more than a few feet in front of us in the blizzard. I practically fell into the entrance." He paused to catch his breath. Jasper said it was an old mining tunnel from the early days, some prospector hoping to strike it rich, I guess. They continued in silence for what felt like hours, the passage sometimes narrowing until they had to turn sideways to squeeze through. other times opening into small chambers where they could stand upright. Wade's strength was failing, his steps becoming more unsteady, but he pushed on. Finally, Zara felt a change in the air, a freshness that suggested they were nearing an exit. Sure enough, the passage began to slope upward, and soon they could see a faint light ahead. The exit was partially concealed by fallen timber and undergrowth, but they managed to push through. They emerged into a small clearing where an old log cabin stood, its roof sagging but still intact. "The hunting cabin," Wade confirmed, swaying on his feet. "We should be safe here for now." Inside, the cabin was dusty but dry. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, and rough-hewn furniture, a table, 2 chairs, and a narrow bed filled the single room. Zara helped Wade to the bed, alarmed at how pale he'd become. His bandage was soaked through with blood, and fever had begun to bright his eyes. "I need to clean your wound properly," she said, searching the cabin for supplies. She found a jug of whiskey in a cupboard her uncle's, no doubt along with some old blankets and a tin of matches. Using the whiskey to sterilize her hands and the wound, she cleaned it as best she could, ignoring Wade's hiss of pain. She then rebandaged it with strips torn from a relatively clean blanket. "You'd have made a good doctor," Wade murmured, watching her work. "Women aren't allowed to be doctors," Zara replied absently, checking his forehead for fever. "Maybe they should be." His blue eyes, clouded with pain but still intent, met hers. "You don't let anyone tell you what you can't do, Zara Morrison. It's what I admire most about you." Something in his gaze made her heart skip a beat. "You should rest," she said softly. "We're safe here for now." As night fell, the storm finally began to ease. Zara built a small fire in the fireplace, keeping it low to avoid the smoke being spotted. She checked on Wade frequently, relieved when his fever seemed to abate slightly, sitting beside the fire, watching the shadows dance across Wade's sleeping face. Zara was struck by how quickly this man had come to mean so much to her. A week ago, he'd been a stranger. Now, she couldn't imagine facing this new life without him. The realization both thrilled and terrified her. She'd come west seeking independence, a chance to build something of her own. She hadn't expected to find someone who made her feel as though she'd found a piece of herself she hadn't known was missing. Dawn broke clear and bright, the storm having washed the world clean. Wade awoke stronger, his fever reduced though the wound still troubled him. "We need to get back to Silver Creek," he said as Zara helped him sit up. "If Caldwell hasn't found us by now, he's probably gone back to town to regroup." "You're in no condition to travel far," Zara argued. "I've ridden with worse," Wade insisted, "and we can't stay here. Sooner or later they'll find this place." Reluctantly, Zara agreed. They found an old canteen and filled it at a nearby spring, then set off through the forest. Wade knew these woods intimately, guiding them along game trails and hidden paths that eventually led them to the northern edge of Silver Creek Ranch. They were spotted by one of Wade's ranch hands, who galloped to meet them with news that the marshal and his deputies had arrived the previous evening. Relief washed over Zara. The nightmare might finally be ending. At the ranch house, they found not only the marshal but also Tommy, Mrs. Abernathy, and the other ranch hands, all anxiously awaiting word of their fate. The reunion was emotional, with Mrs. Abernathy fussing over Wade's wound and Tommy proudly recounting his ride to Denver. Marshal James Bennett was a stern-faced man with iron-gray hair and a reputation for incorruptibility. He listened intently as Wade and Zara recounted the events at the cabin. "We've already arrested Sheriff Caldwell and 3 of his men," the marshal informed them. "They rode into town this morning looking like they'd been through hell and back. The others scattered when they heard we were in the area. "What about my uncle's evidence?" Zara asked. "Safe and sound," Bennett assured her. "Your ranch hand Pete brought it straight to me when he came for help. It's more than enough to convict Caldwell and expose the railroad's illegal operations. And my property, legally yours, Miss Morrison. No one will contest that now." Bennett's stern expression softened slightly. "Your uncle would be proud. He tried to fight these men the only way he knew how, but you succeeded where he couldn't." After the marshal left, promising to return for their formal statements the following day, Mrs. Abernathy insisted that both Wade and Zara rest. Wade's wound was properly treated by the local doctor, who had been summoned to the ranch, while Zara was given a hot bath and fresh clothes. That evening, feeling somewhat recovered, Zara joined Wade on the porch. He sat with his arm in a sling, watching the sunset with a peaceful expression that belied the events of the past 24 hours. "The marshal says my cabin can be rebuilt," Zara said, taking the chair beside him. "The fire didn't do as much damage as we feared. The rain helped." Wade nodded. "My men and I will help with the rebuilding. We can have it ready before winter sets in." "You've done so much for me already," Zara began, but Wade shook his head. "That's what neighbors do," he said simply. A comfortable silence fell between them as they watched the changing colors of the sky. Finally, Zara gathered her courage to ask the question that had been on her mind since their escape. "What happens now, Wade?" He turned to look at her, his blue eyes reflecting the golden light of sunset. "What do you want to happen, Zara?" "I want to build something on my uncle's land," she said honestly. "Something that would make him and my parents proud, but—" She hesitated, then decided to speak from her heart. "I don't want to do it alone anymore." Wade reached across the space between them, taking her hand in his. "You won't have to. When I came west, I was looking for independence," Zara continued, her voice soft but steady. "I thought I needed to stand entirely on my own to prove my worth. And now I understand that true strength isn't about standing alone. It's about choosing who you stand with." She squeezed his hand. "And I choose you, Wade Zimmerman, if you'll have me." Wade's smile was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. "Zara Morrison, I've been half in love with you since you stood up to Sheriff Caldwell your first day in Fort Lyon. After this past week, I'm all the way there." He lifted her hand to his lips. "I choose you too." 2 weeks later, with her cabin partially rebuilt and the threat of the railroad men neutralized by the marshal's investigation, Zara stood on her porch watching as Wade directed the ranch hands in constructing a new barn. His arm was healing well, though he still favored it slightly when lifting heavy objects. Fort Lyon was slowly changing too. With Sheriff Caldwell and his corrupt allies removed from power, a new sheriff had been appointed, a former Army sergeant with a reputation for fairness. The railroad's plans for expansion had been halted pending a federal investigation, and several of the town's leading citizens had quietly left for parts unknown, rather than face charges. When Zara ventured into town for supplies, she was greeted with cautious respect rather than open hostility. The story of how she and Wade had stood against Caldwell and his men had spread throughout the county, earning them a certain grudging admiration even from those who had once scorned them. "Miss Morrison," called Mrs. Henderson, the storekeeper's wife who had previously refused to serve her. "I set aside that fabric you were asking about last time. Blue calico, wasn't it? For curtains." "Yes, thank you," Zara replied, surprised by the woman's newfound friendliness. "And please tell Mr. Zimmerman that my husband has those fence posts he ordered," Mrs. Henderson added. "He can pick them up any time." As Zara left the store with her purchases, she marveled at how quickly things had changed. The town that had once called her a lost cause now treated her as a respected property owner and future wife of one of the area's most successful ranchers. Wade had proposed properly the previous evening, kneeling despite his injured arm and offering a simple gold band that had belonged to his mother. They planned to marry in the spring, after both properties were secure for the winter and the new barn was completed. "You're smiling," Wade observed as he met her at the edge of town, having finished his own errands. "Good day. Better than I expected," Zara admitted as he helped her onto her horse. "Mrs. Henderson actually saved fabric for me," Wade laughed. Amazing what a federal investigation can do for a town's manners. As they rode home, and Zara now thought of both her uncle's property and Silver Creek, as home, Wade told her about his meeting with the new sheriff. "He's asked me to consider serving on the town council," Wade said, sounding both surprised and pleased. "Says they need honest men who know the territory." "You'd be perfect," Zara told him sincerely. "You understand both the land and its people." Wade looked thoughtful. "I've always kept my distance from town politics, seemed safer that way. And now I'm thinking about the future, our future." He glanced at her, his expression softening. "If we're going to build something lasting here, it might be time to have a voice in how things are run." The idea of Wade taking a leadership role in the community he'd once avoided filled Zara with pride. He had so much to offer: wisdom, fairness, and a deep understanding of the delicate balance between progress and preservation. "Whatever you decide," she said, "I'll support you." That night, as they sat together on her porch watching the stars emerge, Zara felt a sense of peace she'd never known before. The journey west had been harder than she'd imagined, filled with dangers she couldn't have anticipated. But it had also brought her to this place, this moment, this man. "I was thinking," Wade said, breaking the comfortable silence, "about names for our ranch." "Our ranch," Zara repeated. Wade nodded. "Once we're married, it makes sense to join the properties. Silver Creek and your uncle's land together would make one of the finest spreads in the county." The idea was practical, but it was the casual way he included her as an equal partner that touched Zara's heart. "What did you have in mind?" "Morrison Creek runs through both properties," Wade said. "Morrison Creek Ranch has a good sound to it." "It does," Zara agreed, leaning against his shoulder. "But what about Zimmerman? Shouldn't your name be part of it too?" Wade's arm tightened around her. "I was thinking our children would carry that name. Seems like enough, children." The word sent a thrill through Zara, the promise of a family, something she'd thought beyond her reach after her parents' deaths left her alone in the world. "Morrison Creek Ranch," she said, testing the name on her tongue. "I like it." Spring came to Colorado in a riot of wildflowers and new growth. The winter had been harsh but productive. Wade and Zara had spent the cold months planning improvements to both properties, designing a larger home to be built between them, and preparing for their wedding. The ceremony was held on a perfect May morning, with the mountains still capped in snow but the valley lush with new green. They exchanged vows beneath the apple trees in Zara's orchard, now pruned and tended back to health. The blossoms filled the air with sweetness, as Wade placed his mother's ring on Zara's finger and promised to love and cherish her all the days of his life. The gathering was small but significant. Mrs. Abernathy, Tommy and the other ranch hands, Marshall Bennett, who had returned for the occasion, and even a few townspeople from Fort Lyon who had come to see the union of two of the county's most talked-about residents. "Never thought I'd see the day," Mrs. Abernathy remarked as she hugged Zara after the ceremony. Wade Zimmerman, married and smiling. "You've worked a miracle, my dear." "We worked it together," Zara corrected gently, watching as Wade accepted congratulations from the marshal. Their honeymoon was a week-long journey to Denver, where they purchased supplies for the new house and celebrated their marriage in the privacy of a fine hotel. Returning to their newly joined properties, they threw themselves into the work of creating Morrison Creek Ranch. By the fall of 1879, the new house stood complete, a sturdy two-story structure of timber and stone, with wide porches and ample room for the family they hoped to create. Wade's reputation for fairness had earned him not only a seat on the town council, but also the respect of many who had once shunned him. Zara had established herself as a successful rancher in her own right, introducing new breeding stock that improved their herd and experimenting with crops suited to Colorado's challenging climate. When winter came again, it found them well prepared and content in their shared life. As snow blanketed the valley, they sat before the fire in their new home, discussing plans for the spring and the news Zara had just shared their first child would arrive in the summer. "A boy or a girl, do you think?" Wade asked, his hand gently resting on her still flat stomach. "I don't know," Zara replied truthfully. "As long as the baby is healthy, I don't mind either way." Wade smiled, pulling her closer. "Either way, he or she will be strong and stubborn, with a Morrison's determination and a Zimmerman's height." "Poor child," Zara laughed. "Doomed to be tall and opinionated." "Blessed," Wade corrected, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Blessed to be born to parents who fought for what they believed in and built something lasting together." As the fire crackled and the wind sang around their sturdy home, Zara reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. She had come west with nothing but a letter, a key, and desperate hope. She'd found hostility, danger, and loss, but also strength, purpose, and a love deeper than she'd ever imagined possible. Fort Lyon had called her a lost cause. Wade had called her his found treasure. And now, surrounded by the life they were creating together, Zara Morrison Zimmerman knew she had finally found what she'd been seeking all along: not just independence, but belonging. 10 years later, Morrison Creek Ranch had grown into one of the most prosperous operations in Colorado. 3 children filled the big house with laughter: 8-year-old Joseph, 6-year-old Elizabeth, and 3-year-old Daniel. Wade had served 2 terms as mayor of Fort Lyon, helping to guide the town toward honest governance and sustainable growth. Zara had become known throughout the territory for her innovative agricultural methods and her advocacy for women's property rights. On the 10th anniversary of their wedding, Wade took Zara back to the creek where they'd found her uncle's hidden documents, the place where their journey together had truly begun. The apple trees were heavy with fruit, and wildflowers carpeted the banks where they had once fled for their lives. "Do you ever think about how differently things might have turned out?" Zara asked as they sat beside the water, watching it sparkle in the sunlight. "Sometimes," Wade admitted. "If Tommy hadn't warned us about Caldwell and his men, if we hadn't found your uncle's evidence, if the marshal hadn't arrived when he did. If you hadn't offered a canteen to a dusty, desperate woman in Fort Lyon," Zara added softly. Wade smiled, the lines around his eyes deepening, lines earned through years of working in the Colorado sun, of raising children, of building a life with the woman he loved. "I knew from the moment I saw you standing up to Caldwell that you were something special," he said, taking her hand in his. "The town might have called you a lost cause, but I saw a woman of extraordinary courage and determination. And I saw a man who stood for justice when it would have been easier to look the other way," Zara replied. "A man who valued strength of character over strength of force." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the creek flow as it had for countless years before them and would for countless years after. Wade's thumb traced gentle circles on the back of Zara's hand, a gesture of affection that had become as natural as breathing. "The children want to ride into town later," Zara said after a while. "Elizabeth is determined to show Joseph that she can order supplies without his help," Wade chuckled. "She's her mother's daughter." "And Joseph is every bit as protective as his father," Zara countered with a smile. "And Daniel is still trying to convince Mrs. Abernathy that he's old enough to help in the kitchen." Zara's eyes twinkled with mischief. "She caught him trying to stir the stew with his toy sword yesterday." Their laughter mingled with the sound of the creek and the rustle of leaves in the gentle breeze. This was the life they had built together, not perfect, not always easy, but rich with love, purpose, and shared dreams. As they walked back toward the house, hand in hand, Wade paused to look out over their land. The cattle grazed peacefully in the distance, the fields were green with crops, and the house stood solid against the backdrop of mountains. "Not bad for a lost cause and a stubborn rancher," he said with quiet pride. Zara squeezed his hand. "Not bad at all for two people who found in each other exactly what they needed most." And as their children ran to meet them, calling excitedly about the adventures of the morning, Zara knew that the true treasure wasn't the land or even the prosperity they'd achieved. It was the family they'd created, the love they'd nurtured, and the legacy they would leave behind. Fort Lyon had called her a lost cause. Wade Zimmerman had called her his found treasure and had never let her go. Together, they had built a life more valuable than all the gold in Colorado, a life of purpose, integrity, and enduring love.